everyone. I am so happy and glad to welcome you to our Fed Live program, Learning is Everything, Session 2, the Rabbinic Period. This program is brought to you on behalf of the Jewish Federation of South Palm Beach County. I am so glad to see the turnout for today's event. There are many familiar faces and many new people joining us today. Our virtual programs are among the many ways our Federation is reaching out to bring our community together, as we also work to meet critical needs for our people at this very, very challenging time. I'd like to remind everyone that the Jewish Federation of South Palm Beach County's annual campaign funds more than 70 partner agencies locally in Israel and around the world, and enables us to respond immediately in times like these. Our agencies responding on the front lines of the COVID-19 crisis have been able to continue their work uninterrupted with the full support of our Federation. We continue to help feed the hungry, care for the elderly, assist those with developmental disabilities, and so much more. If you would like to learn more or to make a donation to support our vital work, please reach out to us at 561-852-3100. Again, that is 561-852-3100, or online at jewishboca.org/donate. jewishboca.org/donate. We will also provide this link at the end of the program. And now a few Zoom housekeeping tips. Please make sure you stay muted on this call. Today, I'm delighted and happy to introduce our featured presenter, Rabbi Dr. Leon Weissberg. Rabbi Dr. Leon Weissberg is a master teacher providing workshops, seminars, and courses on a myriad of Judaic and pedagogical topics. Leon is a graduate of the City College of New York, holds 4 advanced degrees, including a doctorate in educational leadership and a master's in Jewish studies, teaches on the university level, and has a significant background and experiences in a plethora of topics and subject areas. Please help me welcome Rabbi Dr. Leon Weissberg.
Okay, thank you for that, Ida. It's very appreciated. Sometimes the bio gets too long. I need to start to abbreviate the bio somewhere, but that's okay. Thank you very much. I'm going to put up a PowerPoint. Before I do, I just wanted to mention one little thing. Some of you may be aware of this, but this week's Parsha that we're going to be reading on our own this Shabbos, because we're not, everyone's not going to shul. Some of the conservative Reform synagogues have done a fabulous job of doing organized Zoom minyanim, which is very nice. But this week's Parsha of Tazria Metzora, it's a double portion. It speaks of what do you do when there's a contagion among the people, which is phenomenal because this is what we're reading this week. And it talks about separating the ones who are contagious from everyone else, making sure you don't contact and you don't touch those people, making sure that you wash everything consistently. You have to wash everything, and all the clothing and the bedding and the covers that they may have used, their beds that they may have used, has to be washed. In some cases, the clothing would have to be burnt. So this whole week's Parsha speaks about the contagion, right? And everything that it says to do, which was written 3,332 years ago, is pretty much what we're doing today. Stay away from anyone who has the contagion, quarantine yourselves, stay away, put the person into an isolated area, and don't touch, and wash your hands. So that's, this is nothing new for us. This is an old idea. So I'm really glad that I wanted to take a moment and share that with you because, again, that's this week's Parsha. All right, so what we're going to do, wait, let me just get this up there, okay. All right, I'm unmuted, thank you, I got unmuted. Okay, so we're gonna look at what we call the Rabbinic Period. Last time we were together, many of you were there, and again, I started seeing all the names that are popping up, and I can't really stop and say hello to each individual, but there's so many of you that I haven't seen in a while, and it's really good to see you here today. We talked about the temple, and the last time we talked about the first temple, for 400 years, the Second Temple that lasted almost 600 years, and that whole period of time and what went on during that. What we're going to pick up with today is what we call the Rabbinic Period. It overlaps with the Second Temple, and then it will move on to a post-temple time. And in this period, the Rabbinic Period, it's where we begin to develop this concept of the rabbis and what they say. And it's also the beginning of the writing of our books, the Talmud, the Mishnah, and those elements. So that's what I want to spend time with you today. And as we look at this, the first one that we're going to look at is Ezra and his court of law. Ezra is quite was one of the prophets. Malachi is also Ezra, the same one. He wrote everything that Malachi writes is basically Ezra. And Ezra, basically, Ezra is during the transition of the two temples. He's at the end of the first temple and at the beginning of the second temple. And he really tried, now that we didn't have the temple, the first temple particularly, and we no longer had a country. Don't forget, once the temple was destroyed, the country was destroyed as well. We no longer had this idea of a country. He decided to put together a group of people. I'm sorry, it's not getting picked up. Forgive me, I'm sorry. He decided to put together a group of people to discuss and deal with legislation, deal with issues that might come up when there is no temple anymore and there is no king, there is no country. So this is one of the amazing things, this man Ezra, and one of my goals is to really bring to your attention some of these great sages, these great people who really wanted to continue Judaism and not allow it to stop when our institutions disappeared. And Ezra is one of those guys, and he put together this court of law that will slowly segue into the men of the Great Assembly and the Sanhedrin. But he put together this court of law. And one of the things that they had to adjudicate was the issue of Purim. Remember, Purim is not in the Torah. Purim wasn't in the Torah. And the story of Purim unfolds during his era. And one of the things that, particularly the men of the Great Assembly, they had to take a look at this story when Mordechai wrote the book of Esther. Should that book be canonized? Should it become part of what we call the Tanakh, the Bible? And so that's one of the things that they did was to fix the date of Purim. And they introduced also different classifications of the oral law. And Ezra was very responsible for this. We have what's called Midrash. I'm sure many of you heard, oh, the Midrash says this, the Midrash says that. Well, this comes during Ezra and the court of law, and subsequently the men of the Great Assembly. And I'll show you that in a few minutes. The picture on the bottom right is that court meeting and adjudicating issues and concerns. So they had Midrash, and then they had what we call halachot, which is the law, and halakha literally means the way, and the agadot, and agadot is stories, or the tellings of stories, different accounts, different stories. The most famous agadah is, of course, ha-agadah, the story, which is, of course, the Passover story. So these are the three, the oral law is broken up into these three categories, the Midrash, the halachot, the agadot. So these guys really had to put all of this idea and all of this thinking together. As we continue with, and Ezra is the one who put this together. Ezra is the one who decided we have to have some kind of a body, some kind of a legislative body, some kind of an idea. Once the second temple was being rebuilt, Ezra also wanted to get everybody, all the Judeans who were taken out of Jerusalem, out of the land of Judea. Remember, Israel is gone. The kingdom of Israel left 150 years earlier. There is no more than 10 tribes. There's only 2 tribes, Judah and Benjamin. And Judea, the tribe of Judea, are the ones who eventually will now become the Judeans, Yehudim, or the Jews. That's when we're introduced to the word Jews, not Israelites. And so Ezra, once the temple, we got permission to rebuild the temple from the Persians, because the Persians conquered Babylon, the Babylonians, and once they conquered Babylonians, Persia now owned that whole land. And the Jews asked the Persians for permission to rebuild the temple, which they gave them that permission. Darius particularly, he's Cyrus III, Darius particularly gave not only permission, but help in rebuilding the Second Temple. And at the time of the Second Temple, also, the idea of this legislative body was very important. And this was something new because we didn't have that in the First Temple. In the First Temple, we had a king. And the king and the high priest would be the two bodies that had to meet and dealt with issues of the Israelites. Now there's no king. So now we create what's called the men of the Great Assembly, Chazal. And Ezra also gained tremendous prominence in the Jewish community. He began the process, and this is really critical, of identifying the lineage. And he started doing research of all the great families. What was their lineage? He wanted to make sure he understood the lineage of, first of all, the Davidic Dynasty, and how, what the line is of the Davidic Dynasty, and some of the other dynasties of the great priests. And Ezra, he was known as Ezra HaSofer, Ezra the scribe. He wrote down the lineage of hundreds of families. And we have those documents, and a lot of families, particularly in the Sephardic world, can actually trace their family's roots back to the lineage that he subscribed. One of the other things that Ezra gives us, and I mention Ezra because he is really quite an important figure here. One of the other elements that Ezra gives us is the transliteration of the Torah. The Torah text was written in what was ancient Phoenician Hebrew, which I have a picture of there on the top left. And that ancient Phoenician Hebrew, people couldn't read anymore. And now that the temple, the Second Temple was, and people, the Jews were living all over. They're living in Persia, they're living in Babylon. Many of them were living in Egypt. Everybody's not coming to the temple to hear the Torah read on Shabbat. That's not happening. So, and others can't read the Torah because they can't read that script. So he literally transliterated the Torah into the Aramaic Hebrew, which is the Hebrew that we read today. And so that was one of the great things that Ezra gave us. One of his many accomplishments was the reestablishment of Torah adherence, because with that, he created this concept that we have to be able to read the Torah. If we can't read it, then people are going to forget it. So Ezra, somewhere in the 5th century BCE, is one of the great leaders, and he begins this trend, if you will, of not the Cockaigne, not the kings, not the priests, outsiders starting to deal with issues of Jewish life and the Jewish awareness. That what morphs out of Ezra and his code of laws, and Ezra and his court that he had created, comes what's called the men of the Great Assembly, the Anshe Knesset Hagadola. Okay, and the Anshe Knesset Hagadola was literally a synod of 120 scribes, sages, and prophets in the period from the end of the biblical prophets, literally almost to the end of the Second Temple. And this group, Anshe Knesset Hagadola, were incredible people. And they would meet a few times a week regularly. They all traveled together and they would meet, and they would discuss all kinds of issues. They would discuss, among the developments in Judaism that we can attribute to them are, number one, fixing the Jewish biblical canon. They're the ones who decided what books at the end will finally get into the Bible, the Tanakh, the Ketuvim, the writings, who would be the minor prophets that would be included in the Navi, and some of those important items. The last books that they put in there were literally the book of Ezekiel, the book of Daniel, and the book of Esther. And after the book of Esther is the last book that's put into the Torah. And these were the guys who literally said the Bible, the Tanakh, is closed. It's completely closed. No more, nothing else can be added to the Tanakh. And it's closed. The last book is the book of Esther. And they decided that book will be considered one of the divine books. And it's in there. And that was, that was an important element. But now comes another issue. Most of the Jews in the world at that time are not living in Jerusalem. The majority of Jews now are outside the land. They're in Babylon, they're in Persia, they're in Egypt, they're outside the land, completely outside the land. And so they can't come to the temple on a regular basis, and they don't, obviously. They'll come for what we call the Shalosh Regalim, for the 3 pilgrimage holidays, which are Pesach, Shavuos, and Sukkot. But even those holidays, everyone wasn't willing to travel a 2-week trip to go to the temple for Shavuos, let's say, for one day. And for Pesach, to travel Pesach was difficult because of food. For Sukkot, you usually have the largest turnout at the temple was for Sukkot. Because for Sukkot, everyone came with their own lodging, and they parked wherever they parked, and they put up a sukkah, and they lived in it. So they didn't even have to rent the inn or a hotel or anything like that. But the men of the Great Assembly also decided that they needed to put together a worship service. And so they wrote, among all of them together, they wrote 18 blessings, which we call the Shimon Esrei. And the Shimon Esrei, or the Amida, it's the silent prayers that we stand. In some cases, some synagogues, they read it first, and then silently you finish it on your own. In Orthodox synagogues, you read it by yourself quietly, and then it's repeated. They wrote the 18 blessings. They're the ones who gave us the Shimon Esrei, and then they also decided that we have to also say the Shema, and they also wrote a passage called Aleinu. And they put that together, and they said, this has to be our daily prayers. And for men, of course, to do this when they put on their tefillin. So this was the whole idea of creating synagogue rituals, synagogue prayers, comes from this group, the Anshe Knesset Gedola, which will morph into the Sanhedrin subsequently. And we're told, if you read Pirkei Avot, the first section of Pirkei Avot, it tells us that the prophets, God gave Moses the Torah, Moses passed it on down to the prophets transmitted the Torah to the men of the Great Assembly, and Simon the Just, Shimon Hatzadik, he was the last leader of the Great Assembly. With him, the Great Assembly will end. He will be the last leader of the Great Assembly. And with him, and during the Great Assembly, they also added the Kedusha, every time you say the Kaddish and all of those, that was added there, and Havdalah. It was decided also, when Shabbos is over, we need to have certain prayers to say at the end of Shabbos. So this all comes out of this body, this group of body, which is about 2,400 years ago. And the prayers, the entire rituals were put into a definite shape by the men of the Great Assembly. And then we have another text, the beginning of the Mishnah. The Mishnah ascribes the following teachings to the men of the Great Assembly. And this is like one of the great principles that came out of there. And it says, they would write all these codes: be patient in judgment, have many pupils, and put a fence about the Torah. And they kind of said that each one of these guys in the Great Assembly were teachers. They had students that followed them, and they would teach others. That's how the law got passed down. That's how Torah got written. In other words, they each had hundreds of students in different classes all over. They had hundreds of students. When it gets to Rabbi Akiva, he's going to have 24,000 students, the largest school ever of Torah study. And one of their jobs of the students was literally to copy down, to write down, the things that the rabbis said, that the leaders said, and periodically they would find a really good person with a great handwriting and good skills to write a Torah, because the Torahs had to be spread out. The Torahs had to go to all kinds of places. So they would give us these Torahs, and they gave us various quotes, various thoughts for the modern people who literally could not study, could not read, who may not be as literate as the others. And so be patient in judgment, have many pupils, and put a fence around the Torah. And the fence around the Torah became what we call halakha, all the rules of how to live a life. And here, again, I'm still with Ezra, and then after that, I'll move along quicker. But Ezra is such an important player, because this is after the destruction of the first temple. And Ezra set everything in motion. And these were his major enactments, 10 of them. The Torah is to be read publicly during the afternoon service on the Sabbath. And today we still do that. Shabbat afternoon, during Mincha service, Shabbat afternoon, we take out the Torah and we read the next week's portion. A short piece of it, only 3 aliyot, that's all. But he said, because he said we have to do that, which creates continuity. Then he said the Torah has to be read publicly during the morning services on Monday and Thursday. He established that. On Mondays and Thursdays, you say, well, okay, every Monday. Who made that rule that Mondays and Ezra and his court of law, and subsequently the men of the Great Assembly maintained it. And that the judges should gather on Mondays and Thursdays, and that's when all the people would come into various villages and towns, the farmers, and that's when judges should adjudicate issues that between the people. Clothing should be laundered on Thursdays in preparation for the Sabbath. It's not just that they have to be laundered on Thursdays. The key was you need to wash your clothes, which was unheard of. And Ezra put that in motion. And also, because the Shabbat was considered so important, remember, these are people that are not going to the temple anymore. These are people that are living in the diaspora, the first diaspora. So wash your clothes for Shabbat. Shabbat should be something different where you wear nice clothes. Garlic should be eaten on Friday in preparation for the Sabbath. That's a weird one, right? Well, the key, of course, is particularly in ancient times and even today, garlic is considered a source of tremendous enrichment and health. And, we put garlic in all our foods. Garlic is a good thing. And he said that everyone should have some garlic on Friday. And that'll keep you healthy for the Shabbat. Women should bake bread early in the morning and have it ready to give to the poor, so that by the afternoon, a piece of your bread, and we call that the challah, you have to tear off a piece of the bread, that goes to the poor. Everybody had to have bread for Shabbat. Here's one, number 7. Women should wear undergarments. Okay, now, you think about that. There was no such thing. And women should wear undergarments for modesty, for sneakers, he made that edict. Women should wash their hair prior to immersing in a mikvah. We're talking about hygiene. We're talking about issues of hygiene that are being brought forth. That peddlers should circulate throughout the town selling cosmetics. Okay, that was a new idea. And that men who experience a nocturnal emission should immerse in a mikvah before studying Torah. The whole idea of cleanliness, this whole idea of hygiene, was a very important concept in Judaism, very much so. The last man of the Great Assembly, the last Kohen, was a guy named Shimon Hatzadik. Shimon Hatzadik was unbelievable. He was deeply interested in the spiritual and material development of the nation. He's the last Kohen Gadol, if you will, of the men of the Great Assembly. He rebuilt the walls of Jerusalem. They had been crumbling down. They were old now. They're about 700 years old. It had been torn down by Ptolemy. He rebuilt. He had it rebuilt. He didn't do it. And he repaired the damage done to the temple in Jerusalem, raising the foundation from the first destruction. Remember, don't forget, 586, not only the temple was destroyed, but the city was destroyed. So he really fixed it up, and he saved the Jewish calendar. The greatest accomplishment of Shimon Hatzadik has to be that he saved the Jewish calendar. When Alexander the Great conquered Jerusalem, he went and he met with Shimon. And basically, Alexander's edict was everyone had to get rid of every tribe, every society had their own calendar. And he said, all calendars are gone, only keep Alexander's calendar. My calendar is the only calendar you should keep. Needless to say, for the Jews, if we got rid of our calendar, that would be very difficult because our calendar tells us when things are, the rituals. So Shimon Hatzadik met with Alexander. They had a very cordial meeting. He kind of said, yeah, come over to the house for Shabbos. Maybe we'll have a schnapps together. We'll talk, we'll schmooze. It'll be a very friendly thing. At any rate, at the end of their conversations, he convinced Alexander that the Jews, without their calendar, could no longer be Jewish. If the calendar disappeared, we would lose Judaism. And so Alexander allowed us to keep the calendar and a dual calendar. For all of our ritual issues, everything, we can keep our calendar, but we had to use his calendar for contracts. For any secular issues, we had to use Alexander's calendar. And with Shimon Hatzadik, we have the introduction of 2 calendars. And with that, Shimon was so thrilled with what Alexander had done that he declared in Jerusalem that year, every male child born in Jerusalem shall be named Alexander. And that's how the name Alexander got into the Jewish lexicon of names, because of this man, Shimon Hatzadik. And he posited something that we also have in Pirkei Avot. The world exists through 3 things: the law, service, and acts of loving kindness. And we have that in Hebrew, and many of you may be even familiar. There's a song, Al Shlosha Devarim, Al Shlosha Devarim, Al HaTorah, V'al HaAvodah, V'al Gemilut Chasadim. And we teach that to the kids, and we sing it, forgive me for my voice, but I just wanted to read you that in Hebrew because it's very famous. And that was Shimon Hatzadik's words. On 3 things as the world's done: on Torah, on service. Now that we don't have temple sacrifice, today it's prayer or service to the community, and on loving kindness. We move a couple of hundred years down. The Men of the Great Assembly, as that ended, that institution ended, many of their students became teachers. Hebrew word for teacher is rabbi. And they became rabbis, and they became teachers, and they started their own schools in the following of their great mentors. And one of those students who will become a student not until he's 40 years old is Hillel. I'm sure most of you have heard of him. And his dates are 110 BCE, born in Babylon, and he died in Jerusalem in 10 CE. He lived 120 years. He lived 120 years. So there's a lot of discussions and writings about him as a Moses type of person, because his first 40 years, he didn't know much, just like Moses. He left Babylon when he was 40. And when he entered Jerusalem, that's when he began to study, and he studied for 40 years. And his last 40 years, he became the spiritual head of the Jews of Jerusalem, shaping Jewish laws and rituals. And I'm sure many of you have heard of his expressions. You may not know it, attributed it to him. But one of the things he said, if I am not for myself, who will be for me? And being for myself, what am I? And if not now, when? Among hundreds of things that he said and legislation that he did, because he was also the president of the Sanhedrin in his time. These phrases, these quotes have really way outlived him, and we use them today still. We still use them today. And of course, they're very meaningful. You got to take care of yourself. No one's going to take care of you. You're responsible for yourself. But if you're only responsible for yourself, what are you? You also have to, there's a community. And of course, and when are you going to do this? And he's talking about Torah study. If not now, when? Because it also says, you don't know when you're going to die. What if you're going to die tomorrow? You don't know. So you need to start studying Torah today. And then he also said, that which is hateful to you, this had to do with the statue there that you see in the artwork, is a young person asking Hillel to teach him the whole Torah while he's standing on one leg. Okay, and that which, because he said, that which is hateful to you, do not do to your fellow. That's the whole Torah. The rest is the explanation, go and learn. That which is hateful to you, do not do to your fellow. The golden rule is kind of the opposite. Don't do unto others what you don't want them to do to you. But, that's pretty much what this idea was. So Hillel was one of the dramatic people, and concurrent with Hillel is this other guy that works with him, so to speak, the Shammai. And these two guys were the major heads of the Sanhedrin. One was the vice president, one was the president. Shammai lives from 50 BCE to 30 CE, so you can see where they overlapped in their time together. Hillel dies in 10, so for the next 20 years, Shammai becomes the head of the Sanhedrin. He established a lot of rulings based on his perspective, which lasted until well after his death, and we still follow some of those rulings. But one of his thoughts was, make your study of the Torah a permanent endeavor, speak little, but accomplish much, and receive every man with a cheerful disposition. One of the things that Shammai is famous for is nobody could ever say hello to him before he said hello to them. He always said, you always have to be the first one to say hello. Never be the one that responds to someone else saying hello to you, passing in the street, walking next to each other. Shammai, and sometimes his students tried to catch him, but as soon as he saw them out of the corner of his eye, he would raise and say, hi, hello, how are you? He was one of the great thinkers with Hillel, who gave us a lot of the rules and the laws that we follow today. And their students, and they both established major schools, the house of Hillel and the house of Shammai. And they were among the Jewish scholars, these two schools of thought during the period of what we call the Tanaim. These were the rabbis now. And these two schools had vigorous debates on what's the right way to do things. And they shaped what we called still the oral law and Judaism as it is today. And to give you a couple of ideas of where they disagreed, excuse me one second. Beit Shammai believed that only a worthy student should be admitted to study Torah. Beit Hillel believed that Torah should be taught to anyone in the expectation that they will repent and become worthy. So right away, you have two different things. For Shammai school, you needed to pass exams, not written exam, but your ability to think. You would be interviewed and questioned whether or not you were the right person for your school. Hillel didn't do that. Hillel because don't forget, Hillel comes along and he started learning later in life. And because he started learning later in life, he would not have been a worthy student for Shammai. He would never have passed Shammai's exams. So Hillel took a different tack on, and much of our Jewish education today, and many of our concurrent community schools, anyone Jewish who wants the Jewish education, we invite them to come into the school. We don't say, well, you're not smart enough for this. That would be a rare thing today. White lies. This one is very famous. Whether one should tell an ugly bride that she's beautiful. It's a big issue. Are you allowed to lie? Let's say she's really not beautiful, but it's a bride. Bet Shammai said, you can't lie. Avoid the topic, get away from it. It's wrong to lie. Hillel said, all brides are beautiful on their wedding day. And when you tell a bride she's beautiful on her wedding day, it's because it's her wedding day. She's beautiful. She has to be beautiful on her wedding day. So right away, you see that difference. Bet Shammai held that a man may only divorce his wife for a serious transgression. But Bet Hillel allowed divorce for even trivial offenses, such as burning a meal. What Hillel really believed that if there's a reasons for divorce, don't make divorce difficult. Don't make it difficult. If the man and wife need to divorce, let them divorce, because there's a reason that they want to separate from each other. Hanukkah also became an issue between the two schools. Bet Shammai held that on the first night, 8 lights should be lit, and then they should decrease on each successive night. Now, don't forget, this is about 100 years, 150 years after the Hanukkah rebellion, the story of the Maccabees and everything that happened, and the rededication of the temple, when they started using candles, or oil, actually. It was oil, not candles. And Shammai said we should follow the principles of the Torah, and that is all our great holidays start great, and then they kind of wind down towards the end, such as Sukkot, such as Pesach. By the 7th day, who wants to eat any more challah? Any more matzah? We're done with that. Hillel said quite the reverse. Because Hanukkah is not Torah, and it's not in the Torah, we should not follow the Torah way. We should start with 1, and we should end with the 8 lights. And so each of the schools of thought followed that particular philosophy. On the 4th day, you never knew. Everyone had it in the windows, of course. On the 4th day, everybody was united because everyone had 4 candles, and it didn't matter. You didn't know if they were Bet Shammai or Bet Hillel. Subsequently, somewhere around the 3rd century of the Common Era, the rabbis of that time, who were finally closing the Talmud, came back to this particular issue and said, we need to unify everybody. We need to basically do it one way. So the question is, who's right? Is Hillel right or is Shammai right? And the rabbis of the 3rd century, 4th century, 300s, 4th century, the rabbis of the 4th century basically said, the greater of the two is Shammai. The greater of the two is Shammai. So this is what we're going to do. For now, we're going to follow Hillel's way. And then when the Messiah comes, we will revert to Shammai's way. So I always tell people around Hanukkah, be ready. In case the Messiah shows up, we got to do it the reverse. So, that's something. So you should know that for next year's Hanukkah. This coming year, Hanukkah. The next person I want to talk to you about is literally Rabban Gumley al-Chazaken. We don't know when he was born. We know he died in 52 of the CE. And he was a leading authority in the Sanhedrin. He was also one of the princes of the Sanhedrin in the 1st century. He argued that the law should protect women during divorce, and that for the purpose of remarriage, a single witness was sufficient evidence for the death of a husband. As you know, if you can't prove that your husband died, many of the husbands would travel, merchants travel, went on ships, and if they didn't come back and there's no proof that the person died, the woman cannot remarry, and we call that aguna. She's kind of left abandoned. And so and in order to, the law then was 2 witnesses have to be able to testify that they saw that he was dead. So they changed it to 1 witness, because there were a couple of cases where 1 witness on the ship had come back and said, your husband died, but they needed another witness. And the Sanhedrin basically ruled under Rabbi Gamliel that 1 witness would be sufficient. He was recognized as a Pharisaic doctor of Jewish law, and he really started to do all kinds of law. His son is also responsible for writing the 19th blessing of the 18 blessings. He added 1 more blessing, and that was during the period of the beginning of Christianity. The early Christians in the 1st century, till the end of the 1st century, beginning of 2nd century, they had no churches. The early Christians didn't have churches. They would go to synagogues. That's where they went, because there was no one had created the laws and the rules of Christianity other than the Messiah had come, and we believed that the Messiah had come, and he died for our sins. That was the basic tenet, if you will, at first. So they would go into the synagogues and they would literally pray with the Jews. But at the same time, they would try to convince everybody to believe that the Messiah had come. And Gamliel's son, who's also Gamliel the second, this is Gamliel Hazaken, Gamliel the elder, his son, Gamliel the younger, Gamliel the younger, had another blessing. And that was basically, that blessing was a curse. And it said that everyone who is, who's trying to convert the Jews is to be cursed and damned forever. And everyone had to say that prayer. So slowly the Christians didn't want to be there when they started saying that prayer because it attacked them. And we still say it today. It's the 12 of the 18 blessing of the 19 now. It's the 12th blessing. And so that moved them out, and that got them to start their own churches because that way they wouldn't stay with try to convert all the Jews to the belief that the Messiah had come. Shimon bar Koziba, or his name was changed later to Bar Kokhba, was one of the great fighters. In 132. The Emperor Hadrian threatened to rebuild Jerusalem into a pagan city dedicated to Jupiter, and he renamed the city Ayala Capitolina. And some of the leading sages of the Sanhedrin at that time supported the Jews having a rebellion. The Jews really had been fighting against the Romans trying to kick them out. The Masada story was kind of the end of the Jewish rebellion. But 60 years later, Bar Kokhba, or Shimon bar Koziba, with a lot of the Jewish leaders, had another rebellion. And this was a big one. He gathered together 10,000 Jews to fight with him, Shimon bar Koziba. And the rabbis at the time, particularly Rabbi Akiva, gave him validation. And Rabbi Akiva pretty much declared him to be the Messiah, bar Koziba. And so that was a big step at that point in time. His revolt started in 132. He was very successful. He recaptured the city of Lud. City of Lud is where the airport is, Ben Gurion Airport. And that whole area, the size of Ben Gurion Airport, he declared that to be the renewed kingdom of Israel. And for 3 years, we had Israel again in that little area. We even have coins. I actually have one of the coins from Bar Kokhba, the writing of that particular era. They created the country. It lasted 3 years. The Romans came in finally in 135 and destroyed the city of Lud and destroyed everything that they had built, and also declared that all Jews are barred from coming to Jerusalem. They were forbidden to come to Jerusalem until Constantine, which will be 300 years, except for 1 day a year. Think for a minute. 1 day a year, the Romans said the Jews could come to Jerusalem. And that's it for the year. Otherwise, it was no Jews for 300 years. Just a thought. I'll let you pause, think what that day of year is. So whoever said Tisha B'Av was right, but all the other days, no. Only on Tisha B'Av. And why on Tisha B'Av? As far as the Romans were concerned, you want to come to Jerusalem? Come on the day that we destroyed the temple. Okay? That's what we want you to remember, the day that we destroyed the temple. We move on, of course, and one of the great masters of the time is Rabbi Akiva. And Rabbi Akiva was a leading contributor to the Mishnah, the Midrash Halacha. He's also sometimes credited. He's also credited with redacting Abraham's version of a book called the Sefer Yetzirah, some of the words of Abraham. And he's referred to in the Talmud as the Rosh LaHakaim, the chief of the sages, Rabbi Akiva. He was executed, as I'm sure many of you know, and his blood dripped, and his last words in his execution was the Shema. And as a result of his last words being the Shema, we have now used that the last words anyone should say upon their death is the Shema. Because Rabbi Akiva, those were his last words. And when his blood, they flailed him to death. That's how he was killed. In the arena there, he was tied for, his 2 legs, and they flailed his skin. Someone kind of saw the blood dripping down, spelled out the word Shema. Not sure if that's a legend, but he did say the Shema. His students heard him say that. And of course, we have another guy, Yochanan ben Zakkai, who also was responsible for saving Judaism in the first century. He was a primary contributor to the Rabbinic Judaism and the Mishnah, and his name is often preceded with the honorific title called Rabban. Sometimes these guys get the nicknames. Rivzi is his nickname, Yochanan ben Zakkai, Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai. They take the initials and they make a name out of it. He's widely regarded as one of the most important Jewish figures of the time. He escaped the Roman destruction in the year 70. He's the one who went to Vespasian and said to him, "You're going to become the emperor." And Vespasian said, "What are you talking about?" And then like a day later, a messenger comes from Rome that the emperor died and Vespasian is now the emperor. So with that, he said, I'll grant you any wish you want, but you cannot have Jerusalem. So he said, "Give me Yavna. Let me take my students out of the city and take them to Yavna." And so he basically, by creating Yavna, and he built in Yavna a new yeshiva, he was able to hold on to the idea of Torah study. His tomb is located in Tiberias, right with Maimonides. And of course, Yochanan ben Zakkai, there's Yavna there. You can see the star, the burst is Jerusalem, and a little bit to the left of that is Tel Yavna. That's where Yavna was. And there he opened up a yeshiva, and he started to teach and make sure that his students studied Torah. And that was a major piece of continuing. And that became the center of Torah study, was Yavna, because Jerusalem was no longer a center of Torah study. So he was able to maintain the idea of Torah study and made all kinds of rules on how to study Torah, what we should do, how we do it, where we do it. So Yochanan ben Zakkai is one of the really most famous rabbis of that particular time. Also, if you look on the, many of you may have seen that Knesset menorah outside the Knesset building. There's a giant menorah, and it's got beautiful caricatures and all that. And one of the caricatures, and I pointed to which one it is, I kind of made it bigger for you. That's Yochanan ben Zakkai watching the temple being destroyed and pleading to take the people to Yavna. So that's part of that menorah. If you've ever gone there and seen it, you need to take the time and look at all the little panels. They're the entire story, the biblical story and the contemporary story of Israel is carved on that menorah. It's quite a menorah. And then we have Yehuda HaNasi, one of the great, really one of the greats. After the suppression of Bar Kokhba, 135, the vast majority of Jews were sent into exile. 10,000 Jews were killed. I mean, it was a devastation. Judah HaNasi, Nasi means the prince. He was the president of the Sanhedrin. Judah HaNasi, he edited together the judgments and traditions into the authoritative code of the Mishnah. What he did is he started to collect everything that the rabbis wrote, everything that they had been putting together, and he put it into different categories. And he literally is the one who put together what we call the Mishnah, and he composed and edited the 6 orders of the Mishnah. The first one being seeds, Zeraim, dealing with prayers and blessings. The second one, Moed, the festivals, pertaining to all the laws of Shabbat and all the festivals. The third one was Nashim, about women, concerning marriage and divorce, forms of oaths, the laws of the Nazarite, what the contract when you marry a woman, the ketubah, all of those things are in Nashim. The fourth one was Nizikim, the laws regarding civil jurisprudence and torts and laws and business and what you should do if someone cheats you and all those kinds of things. The fifth order was Kedushim, the laws mainly pertaining to the temple and its sacrifices and kosher and non-kosher foods. And finally, Teharot, purity, the laws of purity, the laws of ritual purity and impurity. And these 6 books became the writing, basically the oral law put down into a written form. Now, once he did that, there were so many rabbis around him, even the men of the Sanhedrin said, "How dare you do that? Who gave you the authority to take the oral law, which we've been talking about, and we have notes, everyone has notes on the oral law that's been passed down since Joshua, to put it in writing? We have the written law as Torah. Now you're putting the oral law into writing, trying to make another Torah. Did you speak to God?" Anyhow, a band of rabbis came to his house, literally, with torches, and they wanted to burn his entire library and burn his house down. It didn't happen because other rabbis came and said, you can't do that. And his response to them is, you are not my judge. Okay, and my judge, and this is a very famous response, time shall be my judge. Only time will be my judge. And with that, basically what he was saying is that if this is not meant to be these 6 books, then they'll disappear. Well, needless to say, the 6 books did not disappear. The Mishnah became the basis by the year 400 of the Common Era of the Talmudic writing. The Gemara and the Talmud come out of the Mishnah. And we still have his Mishnah today, and we still, and in the Orthodox world, the Mishnah is still, his Mishnah is still used to determine Jewish law and halakha. So time, 2,000 years later, basically said he did the right thing. Don't forget, at that time also, the Gospels were being written, other books were being written. There was a sense for many Jews, they were looking at Christian, and they didn't have anything in writing other than the Torah. And so he felt it had to be done. And so he did that. So he was one of the greatest men, Yehuda Hanasi. Hanasi means the prince or the president of the Sanhedrin. And his lineage actually has been followed down. And we know some people today who are a descendant of Yehuda Hanasi, very, very much so. So what I tried to share with you a little bit was the order, the early rabbinic period, which continues on and into the commentators, the great commentators. So you have, the group that I just talked to you about now is through the period of the Tanaim and the Amoraim. We're going to pick it up on May 5th. God willing, we'll pick up the rest of this, and we'll go into the commentators who kind of come a little bit more to the present and shape Judaism. What I'm trying to share with you is Judaism survived these thousands of years because great men decided at the time how to hold on to Judaism even when our institutions were gone, when the country was gone, when the kingship was gone. How do we continue with Judaism? So that's kind of what I thought I'd share with you, and I hope I've given you something to think about. I wish you all a wonderful Shabbos. Stay safe, and please wash your hands regularly. Shabbat Shalom.
Can everyone hear me? Thank you, Leon, for taking the time to be with us today. I have studied with Leon. I've had the privilege of working with him for many, many years. I've heard this presentation many times, and like a true classic, I still got something new out of it. So thank you so much, Leon. Thank you all for joining us. Look for emails from us with more ways to connect with our Federation and your Jewish community during these very unprecedented and challenging times. I would just like to kind of turn back to what Rabbi Dr. Weissberg spoke to us about, what Hillel said, if I am not for myself, who will be for me? So everyone, please stay safe. Please, wash your hands. Please be careful. But also, if I'm not for others, what am I? And if not now, when? Now is the most wonderful time to get connected to our Federation, who's on the front lines of taking care of our most vulnerable in this extraordinarily challenging time. If you would like to support the Federation and all the good work it does, again, you can call us at 561-852-3100 or visit us at jewishboca.org/donate. Again, everyone, please stay safe. Be well. We look forward to seeing you on May 5th for the third session of this program. And we will also be participating in our International Day of Philanthropy on May 5th as well. Stay tuned. Check your emails for more information. Have a great day.